And I think there's something about this tiny little people and tiny little bit of land which touches on the essence of what it means to be a human being. My name is Doron Perez. So I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa, to a traditional family, very warm feeling about Judaism, but not necessarily all religious. And around my bar mitzvah, we started becoming a bit more observant through my parents, and they became sort of more religiously committed. 10 years ago, we made Aliyah, where I was privileged to be selected as the new CEO of the World Mizrachi Movement.
Before we get into my questions about Israel, just tell us personally, since the events of October 7th, what your family's been through and so your personal connection.
Well, we've been through so much since October 7th. The Jewish people have, but our family. I mentioned we got 4 children. Our two oldest are boys, second 2 are girls. Both our boys, even though we made Aliyah when they were 15 and 13, not simple ages, but they really integrated well into Israel. Both went to either yeshiva to learn or to what's called a pre-army military academy like a yeshiva. Each one went to study, one for 1 year, one for 2 years. They both went to the army. They both became commanders. They both signed on and they became officers. Our oldest son, Jonathan, was an officer in the paratroopers. Our youngest son, Daniel, was an officer in the tank corps. Both fought on October 7th. Daniel was actually in the Nachal Oz base in his duty on the Gaza border. Jonathan was at home because his soldiers were at home that Shabbat. He raced out at 8 o'clock. Jonathan fought for 6 hours and eventually got shot in the leg and injured and taken to Soroka Hospital in Beersheba in the late afternoon. Daniel fought for the first 2.25 hours in his tank from 7:45 till 9:01, where he was unfortunately shot, injured, and probably killed. But he was taken, we finished the day on October 7th, Simchat Torah, with one son in Beersheba Hospital in Soroka injured and the other one not knowing his fate. And Daniel had then been missing for 2 weeks, then taken captive. Then we heard he had been injured based on blood they found in and around his tank. And thankfully, they found a uniform of his around the tank which had blood on. The blood was his. And the reason I say thankfully is because after 163 days, when he was actually declared deceased as of October 7th, based on new footage, we actually had something to bury. Most of the people who have been declared deceased in Gaza have nothing to bury. So they've sat shiva and been through the mourning process with no grave. We have a grave, even though his body is not there. We hope and pray that it'll come back soon with all the hostages. But at least we have a grave on Israel's National Cemetery in Har Herzl, a place to go to. And we are thankful for that despite the pain of loss. Jonathan, our injured son, had an operation. He recovered. He got married 10 days later, even though Daniel, his best friend, and our son was missing. But we decided to go ahead with a wedding, a small wedding in our hometown. We canceled the wedding hall, did a small wedding, and it was very painful, but very, very happy. And I say that as painful as Daniel's loss, or then his being missing, was, we were still able to have a very happy chuppah. So the chuppah was an hour of immense joy with 3 minutes of intense pain, where we focused on Daniel, we prayed for Daniel, and then we wiped our tears and we focused on Jonathan. And then, we had pictures for the family. It was very difficult. And again, it was beautiful with a few moments of intense pain. It was okay. We got through it. And thank God it was a happy occasion despite being tinged with so much pain and sadness.
Well, it's inspiration to all of us. Okay, let's get into some Israel questions. Can you give a brief overview of the history of the Jews in the land of Israel?
The land of Israel and the Jewish people are totally intertwined. I don't think there's other people on earth who have such a long and incredible history or connection to a piece of land. We all know that the first time that God speaks to the first Jew, Abraham, the first thing he tells him is, Lech lecha, go from here and start walking, and I'll tell you when to stop. And God tells him to stop in the land of Canaan, which will become the land of Israel. So the beginning of the Jewish journey begins with the journey to the land of Israel. So the land of Israel is integrally involved and related to Jewish destiny. Whether we're in it or out of, when we're out of it, it's called exile. When we're in it, we're in it. You can't extract the centrality of the land of Israel from Jewish destiny. It goes back to the first conversation with God to the first Jew. And even though we know that Abraham had to go to Egypt, he came back. And even though 2 generations later, Joseph was sold, went to Egypt, afterwards everyone came back. We came out of Egypt, we all came back. And therefore, the first Jewish festival we have is coming out of Egypt in order to go to the land of Israel. We receive the Torah at Mount Sinai and we go towards the land of Israel. Yes, that generation didn't merit, but Joshua and the next one did. And then they go into the land and merit the land where we lived for almost 1,000 years until the first exile, and that lasted 70 years at the Babylon. And then we went back and built the second temple, and that lasted for many hundreds of years. And of course, when the Romans destroyed the temple in the year 70 CE, we just had Tisha B'Av recently, Tisha B'Av. We know that there's been a non-stop connection of Jews in the land of Israel, almost without exception, even through such difficult times of the last 2,000 years. There has been an unbelievable commitment to having communities in Israel. And what's fascinating is in the year 1840, 170 odd years ago, there were 6,000 Jews living in the land, which was probably about that number for almost 1,000 years. And yet in the last 170 years, the most amazing thing has happened. Jews started coming back. In 1840, I said there were 6,000 Jews. By 1917, the time of the Balfour Declaration, 70 years later, there were already 60,000 Jews. By the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, 600,000 Jews. And since 2010, 6 million Jews. So it's grown 1,000-fold in 170 years, today over 7 million. And therefore the connection goes back to the first conversation with the first Jew, and today, it's unbelievable to see 7 million Jews living in Israel, more than they've ever been. I saw a demographer saying that maybe at the height there was maybe 5 million, going back to biblical times. So there's more Jews than there's ever been in the land.
Why do you think that every time Israel's in a conflict, it takes center stage and the whole world is paying attention to it and giving criticism, while there are so many larger conflicts going on in the world?
There's no doubt that Jews are news. The question is why? There's something about Jewish destiny, and therefore the Jewish land of Israel, which is somehow intertwined to the story of humanity. And therefore, when something happened to the Jews, it's reflective of something broader. There can be much bigger conflicts that nobody cares about, or cares about less because it doesn't reflect so much on human destiny. It's incredible that from the first time God speaks to the first Jew, Abraham, he doesn't only give him a Jewish message, he gives him a universal message. He says, go to the land that I'll show you, and there you will be a source of blessing. Those who bless you will be blessed, those who curse you will be cursed. All the families of earth will be blessed through you, meaning there's a vision from the get-go that Jewish destiny has got something to do with the human spirit. Our mission's not just for ourselves, it's beyond us. And I think there's something about this tiny little people and tiny little bit of land which touches on the essence of what it means to be a human being. One of the great historians, still alive in his 90s, Paul Johnson, has written many books, and one of those books is called A History of the Jews. And in this book he says, nobody has touched human thinking, human moral and spiritual thinking, more than the Jewish people. The idea of monotheism, that there's one God, a personal God that we're all responsible to, and not a mix of gods which are fighting with each other and which doesn't make sense, but a purposeful, personal God, he said, is the most incredible moral idea ever introduced to humanity. The idea of the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue, of that we are responsible to the law and responsible to God. And so many ideas, says Johnson, which at the core of what we call Judeo-Christian values, come from the Jewish people. And therefore, says Johnson, there's something about the dilemmas and the destiny of the Jewish people which touches on the core of human destiny. And therefore, I think consciously or subconsciously, that's what it's about. When you look at the Jews, it touches something deep within the human spirit, which says, hang on, this is different. This has got something, for some reason, to do with me wherever I am in the world, because there's something about God's chosen people. Chosen, when I say, not from a point of view of anything patronistic, meaning singled out for a spiritual mission. That's what the chosenness means. It comes, as we know, with responsibilities. More responsibilities than privileges. Privileges are responsibilities, but responsibility. And I think everybody senses, consciously or unconsciously, that the Jewish story is somehow connected to the human story.
What do you see as the most pressing challenges facing the Jewish community today?
twofold. I think historically, in the last 70, 80 years, we know the challenge has been in the Western world assimilation. We know how many people have slowly not only acculturized, not only married out of the faith, but actually been lost to the Jewish people who no longer identify as Jews. And we know that this challenge of so many unaffiliated Jews and so many who over the time are leaving the Jewish people is a major, major challenge. But I think there's another challenge we're now facing, and it's especially heightened since October 7th, but even from a little bit before, the demonization of Israel. The greatest Jewish enterprise since the Shoah, the Holocaust, has been building an independent state. The fact that 3 years after the ovens of Auschwitz, the Jewish people could rise from the ashes and build an independent state and bring so many Jews back to Israel and build this country where 7 million Jews live, and so many of the Hasidic courts and the yeshivot, which were destroyed in Europe, have been rebuilt in Israel and in other places around the world, is an unparalleled miracle. And it's specifically this state, this country, which has just blossomed and brought so much hope and so much good to the world. This is the greatest endeavor of Jewish destiny in the last number of years. This is exactly what is attacked by Israel's enemies. And therefore today, I didn't think that in living memory of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, we would have such a virulent anti-Semitism, not focused on specifically the Jews, focused on the Jewish state. In fact, in Hitler's time, Jews were hated for being Jewish, part of the Jewish people. In the time of the church, there was a virulent anti-Semitism where the Jews were hated for their Judaism. If you wanted to be accepted, you had to relinquish your Judaism and become a Christian. In Hitler's time, you were part of the Jewish people, nothing could redeem you, and therefore you were killed as part of the Jewish people. Today, we're not hated for the Jewish religion, and we're not hated for being part of the Jewish people. We're hated for being supportive of the Jewish state. And therefore, the new antagonism is towards the word Israel, Zionism. Jews, okay, as Zionists, you support Israel, you're a baby killer, you're a this, you're that, free Palestine. Meaning, everything's okay except if you support Israel. And therefore, that's become the major challenge, is that Judaism, being Jewish, if you're on the progressive side, and if you're on the extreme left, you've got to come along and say, oh, I'm Jewish, but I believe in universal values, not in supporting Israel because it's been demonized. I think that's the challenge today. The fact that Jewishness is so interlinked to the land and people of Israel, and that's specifically what's being attacked, and our connection to the land. The only one country we've ever called our own, where we've got one little Jewish state, we are now demonized because we are occupiers. We the occupiers. The battle of Hamas is not about Judea and Samaria or the Golan Heights or Gaza. They've got Gaza to themselves. The battle is, as they've said, it's about Al-Aqsa, it's about Jerusalem, it's about whether the Jewish people have any raison d'etre to live anywhere between the river and the sea. And the answer is, according to them, no. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, meaning from the river to the sea, there cannot be a Jewish state. Jews do not deserve a place under the sun. And incredibly, the only place we've ever called our own, we've got the longest history too, our enemies do not want us to have any sovereignty in that land and any connection to that land, and that is a massive, massive challenge because Dafka, specifically our return to the land, is the great achievement of Jewish life in this generation, and that is what's being undermined and demonized.
Is it our job as Jews to stand up for Israel?
Absolutely. And why is that? Because of what we just said. If the greatest challenge facing the Jewish people is severing the connection to Israel, that's what our enemies want. From the river, you can be a good Jew, just free Palestine, You can't be in Israel. And therefore, and not only that, since October 7th, which is the genie's out the bag, since October 7th, where 1,200 Jews, as we know, were butchered, murdered, raped in the most horrific way, the worst pogrom since the Shoah. And all we're trying to do is defend ourselves, bring back 250 hostages. Today, as of this recording, 115 hostages. Our son, unfortunately, his lifeless body is one of them. And which country in the world should not go to people who came in illegally, killed, butchered, murdered, and then stole 250, took hostage 250 of our own? And that we expected now, what we're supposed to just wait and then negotiate and say, you know what, take all the terrorists, pull out of here and leave these hostages over there? Or now have to abandon our security or risk our security because they've stolen hostages. We're trying to defend ourselves, trying to make sure that October 7th never happens again, and make sure that all of our 115 hostages come back. And for that, we're being maligned by enemies. So therefore, I believe, and not only that, we've seen other Jewish communities around the world have been targeted. And campuses, who would have believed campuses across the United States? Who would have believed in the so-called elite campuses? So therefore, since the attack is on the connection between the Jewish people and the Jewish state, our response has to be, we stand up for Israel because the Jewish country, the Jewish land, is integrally related and involved and connected to Jewish identity. And therefore you attack that, you attack who we are wherever we are around the world.
But the question is being anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic, is it the same thing? Because there are recently people saying that they're against Israel and Zionism, but they say they're not being anti-Semitic, so...
Is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism? Is being against the Jewish state anti-Semitic? The answer is 100% yes, if anti-Zionism means the Jewish people do not deserve a Jewish state. If you attack the very founding of the State of Israel and don't allow the Jewish people to defend themselves, which means if you support the notion from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that isn't the most grotesque anti-Semitic statement of our generation. Because what are you saying? There should be no Jewish state. And therefore you support October 7th because it's a just war of resistance. You're just killing these occupiers. So if you think that the Jewish state should not exist, then that is an anti-Semitic statement. And by the way, a lot of people are saying it because they're ignorant. You know, there's two things that I think cause people to be negative or to be xenophobic or to be all of these things. One is hatred. People just hate. Another one is ignorance. A lot of ignorant people are marching from the river to the sea, and I'm sure you've heard the interviews. They say, from which river to which sea? We don't know. How can you march and say from the river to the sea where you know nothing about it's absolute ignorance. So sometimes it's just ignorant people who are manipulated by the haters. But if you come along and believe from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, you're an anti-Semite. If you believe that, if you're not ignorant, if you believe that, why? Because you're saying the Jewish people do not deserve their own country in the only land that they've ever had called their own, a land that was awarded to them by the United Nations, a land that they then had to fight a war for, because people forget that every war that Israel's fought have been wars where Israel's accepted to divide the land, rightly or wrongly. Some say rightly, some say wrongly, but Israel's always accepted land sharing. The Palestinians never have, certainly not Hamas. And therefore, if after everything Israel's done is to been awarded by the international community, be prepared to share the land for the Palestinians that they should have their own state, and being attacked time and time again. If after all of this, right, especially post-October 7th, where so many people have been murdered and killed just for being in Israel. So if you say from the river to the sea, you're an anti-Semite, if you believe that. You could be ignorant, right? You could be ignorant in supporting the haters because you're saying the Jewish people do not deserve their own state. They do not have a place under the sun as a sovereign people. And we've seen that these people actually support the murder of Jews and Israelis on October 7th. That is the anti-Semitism of our generation.
In your book, you write about 3 types of anti-Semitism. Can you explain what they are?
Yeah. I was very privileged to write a book actually a year and a half ago. It came out on Yom HaAtzmaut for the celebration of Israel's 75th anniversary, which was in 2023 in April, May. And this book has ideas that I've been working on for many, many years. And the book the book in English is called The Jewish State, From Opposition to Opportunity, to try and understand why it is that anti-Semitism has become anti-Zionism and what could be the solution for us as Jews. That's the second part of the book. In the first part of the book, I explain a novel idea of the Gaon of Vilna in his commentary to the book of Habakkuk. Says an unbelievable thing. He says, if you look at biblical anti-Semitism, he says there are 3 types of anti-Semitism, and I'm going to say them briefly. The one is opposition. It's called the Moabite anti-Semitism, opposition to Jewish values. They come, he says, to contaminate. If you look at the wars of Balak, Melech Moab, and all of that, it's not to fight with the Jews, it's to destroy them through curses. Balak brings on Bilam to curse the Jewish people, fight their values, fight them spiritually, i.e., we don't have a problem with the Jewish people. We have a problem with their Judaism. Fight Judaism, and that from Hanukkah, where Jews could live as Jews, but they had to be Greek, the Greek culture, or to the Inquisition, where Jews had to convert. That's opposition to Judaism. The second and most diabolical time is the Edomite anti-Semitism, which Amalek is part of, and that is, God forbid, the only good Jews are dead, you kill the Jews. They can't convert, they can't change. This is against the Jewish race, the Jewish people. Hitler, Yamach Shemo, from Haman to Hitler, that's what it was. And today we've got a third one, and this is, says the Vilna Gaon, is the Philistine anti-Semitism. Who are the Philistines? When I read this, Mushka almost fell off my chair. The Gaon of Vilna says, Philistines opposed any governance and sovereignty of Bnei Israel in the land of Israel. They didn't have a problem with the Jews. They didn't have a problem with Judaism. They had a problem with Jewish sovereignty. The Philistines allowed us to live in the land as long as we didn't want a king. And if you'll notice that King Saul and King David, our first two kings, almost all their wars were with the Philistines, because the Philistines didn't have a problem with Jews or the Jewish tribes. They had a problem with the Jewish state. You want your own state? No, and that's what they fought against. Today, that is the new anti-Semitism. Although the Palestinians, who share the same name, the Philistines, Palestina, and Palestinians in Roman is the Philistines, even though there is zero connection between the Palestinians of today and the Philistines of old from a cultural, religious, historic perspective. But spiritually, and I think it's not by chance that they bear the same name, they aim to do the same thing. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Right? 150 years ago, no Arab called himself a Palestinian. Palestinian was a Roman name for the land. And by the way, during the British Mandate from the 1920s to 1948, anybody who was in the British Mandate of Palestine was called a Palestinian. The Jerusalem Post used to be called the Palestine Post. In fact, Jews were more quick to take on Palestinian than Muslims were. Not only the Jerusalem Post, the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra of today was then called, before 1948, the Philharmonic Orchestra. So Palestinians was everybody who lived in the British Mandate of Palestine. It's been adopted today, incredibly, by the Arab cause against Israel. And it's not by chance that it's taken on the name Palestinian Philistine, which is basically what, according to the Gaon of Vilna, to deny the Jewish people any sovereign collective presence from the river to the sea. And that is the third type of anti-Semitism. We're not hated today because we are Jews. We're not hated today because we believe in Judaism. We're hated today because of our support for the Jewish state.
Okay. In your opinion, what is the best response to hatred?
The best response to hatred, in my opinion, is two things. Number one, education. A lot of hatred, I do believe, stems from ignorance. People just join others who hate, and they don't always know why. Anyone who says from the river to the sea and they don't know what it is, education. But I think those who hate systematically, if education doesn't work for them, then they have to be opposed. They have to be opposed forcefully. Hamas wants to come and destroy Israel. Hamas has to be opposed, and they have to be destroyed. People on campuses are breaking the rules, are going against the will of the campus, are doing illegal things. They have to be opposed. They have to be opposed by the campus leadership. They have to be opposed by the Jewish community. They have to be opposed by the police. To bullies and haters, they more often than not end up breaking the law because their hate for others gets the better of them. It always spills over, and therefore they end up being bullies. They end up, if a person hates in the heart, nobody knows, okay. You're not judged for what happens. We as Jews are judged for what we do in our heart. That's before God. We're not judged on this world in any court for what we think. We don't know what unless it turns into words and action. If they're hateful words and hateful action, they have to be opposed. If we can educate, that's the best thing. But if we can't educate because we're being bullied and being attacked, then we have to stand up. And also defamation. Yes, there's free speech in the Western world, and we believe in that. But there isn't free speech to say anything you want to. You can't defame people. You can't give license to murder by saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. If you mean by that he's supporting Hamas, then you're supporting a terror organization to kill Israel, to kill Jews in Israel. And therefore people should be brought to task. If you say the word from the river to the sea, are you saying that the Jewish state should be destroyed? And if you are saying that, you are verbally supporting the murder of Jews. People need to be taken to task on that. And I think we have to be upright and confident to say that if you're a bully and you hate, we will try and educate, we'll try and debate, but if that's not going to work, if you're going to try and kill us, we have to defend ourselves. If you're going to try and defame us and use hateful speech and hateful actions, they have to be forcefully defended, because we all know that if you give in to the bullies and the haters, there's just no boundary to how much havoc they can cause.
How do you feel October 7th changed the Jewish world, and what lesson should we take as Jews away from it?
I definitely believe we live in a different world post-October 7th. In our generation now, there's what happened until October 7th and post-October 7th. Israel today is fighting a 7-pronged war. 10 months later, we still have 115 hostages. We have these people called the Chutim, who cared about the Chutim before, sending missiles to Israel, blocking the Red Sea, 400,000 ships a month. The Chutim, Hamas, terrorists in Judea and Samaria, rockets coming from Syria and Iraq even at times, not to mention Hezbollah and Iran. This is what Israel faces today. And we're 10 months in, and we're not sure what the end of it is. The anti-Semitism around the world, just blatant anti-Semitism, the campuses in the United States. And therefore, so the genie's out the bag, out the bottle, and therefore we have to stand up to it. And I believe that we're in a different era now. So many people I've encountered feel a sense of crisis. They feel vulnerable. They said, like, if this can happen, I was talking to somebody last night, they said, like, their confidence, their bitachon, like, we can have a Jewish state and an army, the strongest army in the Middle East, and this can still happen under our noses. People around the communities around the world feel a deep sense of insecurity because of what's happened. And when we feel that, I always feel for me. It's actually what helped me during the 163 days when I was worried about my son. What do we do when we feel vulnerable and insecure? Direct that anxiety, vulnerability to action. It's not going to help me to worry about my son. It's not going to help me to be nervous about him. It's not going to help me not to sleep about him. What will help me is if I can do anything and everything to bring him back. What activism can I do? What activities can I do? How much more? What spiritual things can I do? Davening and praying and acts of kindness. What can we do? So the answer is the world has changed. It's less safe for Jews around the world, and Israel is facing major challenges. What can we do to direct that anxiety and vulnerability to action, to stand up for Israel, to stand up for Israel on all levels? If you're in Israel in the army and the state, we've got to defend ourselves. We've got to defend ourselves in the media. We have to invest in education, invest in political activism all over the world. And also, as believing Jews, there's a spiritual component, prayer. First, we've got to educate ourselves about Israel and Jewish destiny. We read about in the parasha of whenever the Jewish people turn to God as a people, b'chol koreinu elav, that Hashem takes notice. Prayer is very powerful. Acts of kindness are very powerful. We say utshuva, utfilah, utzedakah. We're coming up to the high holy days. We say acts of teshuvah, of returning to a good path, tefillah, prayer, and teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah, and acts of charity. Change the evil decree, meaning we can impact spiritually by becoming better people. So I think the response is being better internally, being better spiritually, being better morally, and standing up to the bullies, standing up to the haters. And how can each and every one of us, wherever we live, we are such a small people, 15, 16 million Jews all around the world. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. I read in China, there's so many people that when they're doing a census of the Chinese, 30 million is considered a rounding error, meaning if we're 30 million out, it's considered accurate. We are about half of a rounding error of a Chinese population census, and look how this tiny people has impacted the world. And therefore, we have to stand up as Jews and take responsibility and say, okay, Rabbi Cook famously said, when there's evil in the world, he said, the truly righteous don't complain about the evil, they add good. I think the Lubavitcher Rebbe is the greatest example of this. There's ignorance in the world. There's challenge in the world. So add good. There's darkness in the world. Light a candle. There's ignorance. Educate. There's hate. Offer love. Meaning, our response always has to be what can we do about it? We don't complain about the darkness. We add light. And our light today is to stand up for Israel, is to deepen our connection as a people to Israel, that our Jewish destiny in the land and and state and people of Israel are intrinsic to that. And wherever we are around the world, wherever we find ourselves in our communities, our families, our campuses, to stand up and be counted and to play our role in moving Jewish history forward and doing whatever we can for the future of Jewish destiny.
How should we approach fostering unity with Jews within diverse Jewish communities?
I think if there's one thing that October 7th taught us, is the importance of Jewish unity. I know for a fact from the heads of the security establishment that based on documents found in Yihya Sinwar's home, Yamach Shemo, the architect of this terrible pogrom and murder, is that he believed the time to attack was when it was because of the disunity in Israel, because of the fighting in Israel around the judicial reform. Now, it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. It doesn't matter. What mattered that our enemies saw this as vulnerability and weakness, figured that we were disunited. Some people said they're not going to turn up for army and reserve duty. They won't turn up as pilots. They believed them. That's how you say you're not going to fight. We believed them. They saw this internal disunity. That played a role, undoubtedly, in that attack. We were very disunified. And yes, we don't have to think the same thing. We're entitled to totally different beliefs. But when we demonize each other, when we attack each other, we've just come out of the period of the 3-week sinat chinam, when there's baseless hatred, when you can't get on with each other, when there's no room for the other. It only brings bad things for the Jewish people. What I think has to happen, the Jewish collective fate, that ultimately we're in the same boat together, that we need each other. Anti-Semitism ultimately galvanizes us and brings us together. We have to cherish that togetherness. It doesn't matter what type of Jew you are. It doesn't matter how religious or irreligious you are. It doesn't matter if you're in Israel or around the world. At the end of the day, this attack was aimed at every single Jew and every single non-Jew supporting Israel. There are people from 20 nationalities taken hostage. It doesn't matter if you were Taiwan or from China. It didn't matter. You're supporting Israel and the Jewish state. You were taken captive. You were killed, God forbid. And therefore, our response, I believe, has to be Jewish unity. If we can stay together, it's my personal belief that the biggest threat facing the Jewish people is disunity. We'll be able to deal with Iran. We'll be able to deal with the Hezbollah. Bezrat Hashem, we'll be able to do it. But if we are our own worst enemy and we can't get on with each other, it's not only sensed by enemy, it spiritually weakens us. And I'll say that our sages say about one of the most wicked kings, Ahab and his wife Jezebel, who did so much damage to the Jewish people spiritually and killed the sages. They were terrible. Our rabbis say that how is it that he succeeded in so many wars where King Saul, who was so righteous, didn't? And unbelievably, the Midrash, our sages say, because in the time of Ahab, even though he was evil, they were all united. The people stuck together. They had each other's back. And that unity was so strong, even though they were idolaters, that none of them died in battle. But in King Saul's time, there was people who would, who would tattletale, and we know that the Kohanim of the city of Nov were ratted out, and they ended up being killed. People didn't have each other's backs. Saul was chasing after David. There were different camps. It was a very disunified time. When there's disunity amongst the Jewish people, it weakens us to our core. And therefore, I believe that what we have to do going forward, despite the arguments and the disagreements, is to know that our collective fate has to bring us together despite our differences, not to demonize others, not to delegitimize others, argue with respect, argue forcefully, but know that we're all in this together. And I think when we're in it together and we stick together and we all feel that we're in the same boat, we'll be able to navigate no matter how tempestuous the waters are and how difficult it is. When we're together and we're looking after our boat, with Hashem's help, we'll be able to navigate whatever comes our way.
The Roar Jewish Learning Institute has the largest collection of Jewish media online. Hit subscribe for more.